Thanks, Annette. So it's always a bit of fun to go up and try and triple hat when you're doing a presentation, but there's a very good reason for that, because I'd like to talk about the why. And the why of what I'm involved with stems from experience. That's basically my career. You can see there the study. I didn't put the University of Melbourne in there, but that's where I did my undergrad, but master's, PhD at the Media Lab, but then all these other organisations, from academia, cooperative research centres, startups, SMEs, big multinationals, just come out of nearly 5 years at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. A couple of 100,000 employees there, carving off bits over the last couple of years. But what I want to talk today is about there are holes in the ways that we do things, and it's the extension of what Angela's talked about, being McKinsey'd. Where do we actually implement strategy? Problem is that these holes that we're seeing are actually hurting us quite badly. If you look at it, it pulls apart what's actually going on with innovation in Australia. It looks at 3 core areas there. But if you dig in there, there's a couple of things which stand out. Percentage of firms that introduced a new-to-market product innovation, 9.23% versus 21.3% for the top 5 in other countries, the other top 5 countries. That's 23rd out of 31. High growth enterprise rate. This is not startups, this is scale-ups. These are the sorts of the Zappos, the Amazons, the Googles, the Instagrams. We only got 0.8% there versus 13.5%, which is the average of the top 5. We're dead last. We have to do better. Rather than jump straight into the survey results, what I'd like to do is to unpack a little bit more around the why and talk about 3 sort of things that I think about when I'm thinking about innovation. The first is that you can't rely on your assumptions anymore. Blind assumptions can now be fatal. Oh, we've always done it that way. That's just the way things are done. And this is the sort of stuff I can see Angela nodding in the front row. If you don't question the way that you're doing things, you're probably going to trip up. Now, I was going to lead with this quote. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. But guess what? That's actually not a quote. I looked it up and it's been attributed to Mark Twain, but it's actually a different form of words from a guy called Josh Billings. Now, Josh Billings was a lot less famous, and he wrote something a lot shorter. It's better to know less than to know so much that ain't so. But everybody talks about the Mark Twain quote. Second thing is, and already, Angela and I didn't talk, but it comes through, employees expect more from their leaders. I know that when I look at the undergraduates that are coming out of UTS, 42% of them or more say they don't want to work for anybody, so they actually want to go into early stage businesses or startups. So there's a great quote here from Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions." I could have gone for the red pill, blue pill thing out of the Matrix or Alice in Wonderland, but I decided I'd keep with the older style things, because this idea that, that people's brains get expanded, you can't unknow something once you've got it. Here's the big one, which is really driving the speed of change. Innovation has never been more accessible. When I was at the Media Lab doing my master's and my PhD, one of the ideas that came out was that when anything was once expensive, scarce or difficult becomes cheap, abundant and simple, you have a moral obligation. You must waste as much of it as you possibly can, okay? So, things are moving faster, our employees are wanting more, people are wanting to have meaning. Innovation, is it simple or is it not? Some people would say that innovation starts with observation. You go through a fairly set of linear process. You've got an insight, a hunch, you've got a hypothesis, you run some experiments, and you get a validated insight, and you get to commercial scale. So the consequences of this are actually playing out across the world. So if you look here, this is a graph of people's lifespans versus company lifespans. People's going up, that's great. Companies is going down. This is why you're having a lot more career changes. The companies that are now the top 5 most valuable companies in the world are all tech companies. Okay? And a lot of them didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. What happens when you have these sorts of things? Well, here's 3 examples. I don't know if people saw this, but JP Morgan came up with a piece of software to analyse contracts. And they worked out that they placed this piece of software there, they're going to save 360,000 hours of employee time. Okay, great for the profitability of JP Morgan, but what does that mean in terms of those people with those skills? What are they going to do? What does that mean for the new employees that come in? Are they going to get the judgment and an insight to be able to operate at a high level, to get the basics? If we automate all of the basic stuff, how do you get that experience? Let's think about robo-advice. It's happening big time in the United States through companies like Betterment. Okay, people are putting more and more money into index funds. If you look at this work by Accenture, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can find the report. There's only a few spots here where the people have the genuine advantage. What about the manufacturing side of things? So we heard about manufacturing, being a problem in this country and how people's jobs are getting displaced. It's happening in China too. A company in China replaced 90% of its workers with robots and saw a 250% production increase in production. And so, how are we going in Australia? Let me tell you a little story about a conversation I had in talking with people for the survey. Crush your dreams. Now, this is not about people's ability to buy a house in Sydney. This is actually a comment about the direct reports to one of the CIOs of our big four banks who said about their CIO, so-and-so, you'll see why I'm going to keep it anonymous, has all these wonderful dreams. Our job is to crush them. We've got a business to run. How is that organisation actually going to move forward from where it is today? If you talk with the people in our big consultancies, and also I see Roger Lawrence is in the back of the room, and our former employer, when we were working with the big telcos, the banks, and a lot of Australian businesses, and I had a role for 2 years looking at analytics and data management, the single biggest challenge that they had to deal with pretty much across the board was getting rid of the data silos, just to get started. So with that sort of background, I was thinking, well, what are we really trying to deal with? I mean, are the company directors aware of what's going on? If you talk with the Australian Institute of Company Directors, they talk about VUCA. People have probably seen this. Things are getting harder for the directors to govern. You really want to go from VUCA on the left-hand side to VUCA on the right-hand side there. But how do you do that? If you look at the core sets of skills that we train our company directors through in the course, the moment they say risk, you've got to understand what's going on and have a risk register and being able to have the right people around the table. You've got to be able to read the financials, the balance sheet, the income statement, the profit and loss, and you've got to make sure that you stay within the bounds of the Corporations Act, the legal and privacy and everything like that. So I wanted to unpack this. So in the Data and Analytics Special Interest Group, we actually ran a survey in the second half of last year, and you're going to get a sneak peek at some of the results that we've been analysing. But we had a bunch of questions and we wanted to dig in, not just at the organisation level. There's plenty of work done out there by Gartner, McKinsey and others that provide how well does your organisation use analytics at an organisation level. We actually wanted to peek inside the organisation. 5 sets of questions: priority and change management, operational focus on data and analytics, data-driven culture, huge, organisational performance, really simple. Are you growing with your profits, your market share? We had around about 236 people start, people opt out, so we got to about 134 through. And we got a whole bunch of questions. So if we look at the responses, we got a pretty good spread. 4% were at the board, a bunch of C-suite, CXO people, senior management. So okay, so we're not just getting people down the trenches, we're getting a good spread of views. And then I'll unpack a couple of questions for you. So let's look at strategy. Excellent. Roughly about a quarter of organisations, the people that answered, are being responsive. But here's the problem. 44% are just saying we do the strategy, become shelfware, we come back to it next year. Is that really going to enable us to be competitive? Let's look to people, what are they doing in their jobs? One of the questions we ask is, where do you focus? So for those of you who've looked at the analytics stuff, it's like you're backwards looking, you're forward looking, you're working out the what, the why, what's next, what should I do, you're automating stuff. So most people said, the little red bar, yeah, I'm trying to work out what I've got to do next. I'm trying to predict what's going to happen, and my boss is doing the same. But if you look over here, this is where it starts to get interesting. Have you got what you need to do this? Turns out, for the most part, no. About 1 in 7 say that they've got what they need, whereas if I'm being a bit nerdy, I'll say it's 4 in 9 say that that's what they need to do. So then we said, well, let's unpack it a little bit further. Let's see if we can identify out of all the people that answered some high-performing organisations and some low performers. So the high performers have said, okay, your revenue's growing, your margin's growing, your market share's growing, happy days. And then we sort of played around a little bit and said, well, what's the definition of a low-performing organisation? Well, let's say you're either flat and you're going down in at least one of those 3 areas. Turns out we've got 39 there and 23 there. So we wanted to then look at the differences and say, What are the causal relationships there? And the biggest thing which popped out was agility. The ones that are doing really well tend to say that when they have change, they're very agile, they're able to respond, they can see what's going on, they talk about how it all fits together. And interestingly enough, the biggest response for the low performance is, we've got to do a business case. One of the biggest problems around the effective use of data and analytics is that you don't necessarily know what you're going to be looking for. So how could you quantify the impact on the business? One of the things I have heard done in organisations is to say, we're not going to have a business case to say X million dollars for a data platform. We're going to actually say that's an insurance policy of X% of revenues, because we don't know what could happen. And so we're just going to fund that. When we unpacked it all and had a bit of a look at this, there's 5 things that we sort of came up with which we think are good places to start, and hopefully they'll be a little bit fun. First of all, start small, start now or go home. If you are not thinking about how to close those loops to get the data, Net Promoter Score is a good example of one of those, then you're going to be in trouble. You will not be able to compete and be effective. You will not be able to have happy employees or happy customers. Second thing is, we know that data is always going to be messy. Don't aim for nirvana. Just commit to continuously cleaning up your data swamp. If you don't own it, people won't care about it. So you have to make people own their data. We talk a little bit about that. But you've got to have the business units own it, and you've got to have someone really seen in the organisation who's sweating there on their KPIs to say, do we have good data? Commit to learning, commit to experimentation. Always respect change. The minute you find someone saying, well, that's just the way things are done or it's always been, that's a big red flag. And the last one is, there is so much out there in the marketplace at the moment which focuses either tactical or operational. If you look at media, for example, stories have their peak value from advertising 12 minutes after they're put onto a news site. After that, then the traffic falls down. So this is the other thing I would say, is that look at both the long and the short term into how you apply data and analytics into your business. Thank you.